The company came to us out of Oklahoma City. It was called Iron Eagle, and they have, it's basically, if you've ever seen a masticator for trees, it is that, but it goes, this one was on a motor grader, on the biggest one you could get, and it was that but for rocks. And so you really can't see it right now because the grass is hiding it, but out in these pastures, as you go and start walking through there, we have what's called tombstone topography. So what that means is that those fault lines are shooting straight up out of the soil right here on this property, and that's how all of the arbuckles are. This is where these faults in Oklahoma City, Dallas, all of that, the Woodford, all of that comes out of the ground right up here, because it's where the, I forget if it's, I think it's the decline is what it's called, is coming from Oklahoma City, and this is where those two faults meet. And so that's where all this tombstone topography comes from. So with that being said, before Iron Eagle came to us, we really had issues burning, and especially before the wind turbines were here. I mean, it was next to impossible because we had one road that went from these mountains over here, and to get to the west side of our ranch, it took us 8 hours. It was so rough. I mean, you crawled at a snail's pace, and it's just how it was. And well, luckily, when the wind turbines came through, they built all of these nice roads, but then luckily Iron Eagle came to us, and what we did with them is we sent them down all of our old existing roads, and then we pinpointed or picked out critical areas where we were going to need fire breaks in the future. And so what that Iron Eagle did, so he'd drive and it would chew that rock up, and then it spits a relatively flat road. And, you know, it follows the topography of the land, obviously, but it spits a flat surface out behind it. And then luckily too with that, so it chews up all of the grass and dirt and everything, so you don't have to replant with one of those. It'll come back to grass, you know, relatively quickly if you get rainfall. And so that was really nice for us too.
What did it cost you?
So that costed us, which I guess it was a good deal, but it was $650 an hour. But he could do about 2 miles an hour if it's not too, you know, rough. And so what we did, again, we picked out our critical areas that were going to take some time, and he said, you know, and he worked with us on the price too, because he was also learning how to use his machine. So he said, you know, I'm going to have breakdowns. That's the purpose of us using this out here, is to figure out where our flaws in our design are, so that way, you know, he could sell a good machine to the public or whoever he ended up selling that to. But so what we did was we cut, and we have a road here that's, I guess it'd be 10 feet wide, and it goes all the way, it parallels 35 all the way down this fence, all the way back to the base of the mountain over there. And then this is kind of our halfway point, and so this is one burn unit over here, and then this is behind us over here. This is burn 9. That's going to get done this spring. And then what's going to happen is the cattle, we're going to winter them over here to reduce the fuel that, you know, will accumulate here, just in case something happens. But luckily for us, there isn't many cedars right here on this road, so we're going to be just fine when it goes time to light our backfire. So what I'll do as a pre-burn prep is I'll come in, and I have a 6-foot John Deere brush hog that I pull behind my 4-wheel drive tractor. And you've got to have a 4-wheel drive tractor out here, otherwise you can't, either the contour won't let you crawl up the hill, or B, so you know, with all these different faults that come out, you have there's, you know, different surface rocks. So at some parts you've got sandstone, and in other parts you've got hard limestone, and some of it you've got Woodford shale that turns to gravel when you start spinning tires on it. And so I'll take that brush hog with that 4-wheel drive tractor, and I'll sit there, and I can't remember what it's called, but there's a lever here that you pull up and down on the bottom right that adjusts the tilt on the back of that brush hog. So I'll just basically put my air plugs in and adjust the tilt all the way down this road, and it'll take me, you know, 3 or 4 hours. I'll go down one side, and then I'll turn around and come all the way back. So I'll do it, what I do is I try to mow them probably 4 times a year. So I'll do, depending on what burn we're going to do, so this one's going to be next spring, this burn over here. So I'm going to come in here right before it gets too cold to mow on an open cab tractor, and I'm gonna mow this line. And then depending on, hopefully the cows will graze that down this winter on all those cool seasons and I won't have to come back and revisit it. If not, I'm gonna come back 2 weeks to a month before we go to burn and mow that out. So that way, all of that excess fuel or that, you know, that dead grass that you just mowed, it has a chance for the rain to knock it down into the ground and it incorporate itself into the ground. So that way you basically don't have hay, loose hay sitting on top of your fire break. For burn 4, which it looks like I left the temperature off of that, so I apologize. But I'd say the temperature, I mean, so what is that, September 19th when we burnt that? I would say it was probably 90-ish degrees, 95. And that's the conditions that we monitored here on site that day. And that was the good thing about this burn, was that 10 to 26 mile an hour wind blowing it away from the interstate. There was absolutely no chance that any of that smoke was going to back over the highway. Now what we did though is on that burn 4, the reason we could do that is we blew it into burn 1, which had been burnt a month before, okay? So there's nothing on the down, basically we lit the backfire, but just to get it burning so the fire would all burn in as one unit. But then we didn't need to. And so, and that's really what we've tried to do with these burners. We've been trying to up our wind speed, but in doing that, we're throwing it into black. Now, I wouldn't recommend that if you're just doing a regular burn, but if you're trying to get Eastern Red Cedar and it's available to you and you can throw it in to an old burn, you definitely want to take advantage of that. Because I can attest, before we had the roads and we'd get wildfires off the interstate, which believe me, we do, that's how we would burn, is we'd go around and look at our roads and say, well, we can throw this into that old fire. And that's but the caveat to that is you'd have to wait on a wildfire. It could be 5 years, it could be 10 years, it could be 20. You don't know how long you have to wait. And so it all depends on how dry it is. So the only consideration we have to make is we have to make sure that no one is working at a turbine that's downwind of the fire. Because if there is, they're going to get smoked out up top. And then so you can see the square, the box on the back of this turbine, they've got a cable and a bucket up there and a winch, and it'll lower that cable down. If someone gets trapped in there, that's their emergency way out. They have to get in that cable and lower themselves down. But as long as we give them a heads up, no, that's never an issue. And as far as
you don't fan the fire?
No, they don't fan the fire. We like it too, personally, when we're burning, because we always know what the wind direction is. And then Dad's really good. He can actually count the number of turns and know how fast the wind is blowing. Because there's a relationship to that as well, as far as turns in a minute. I will tell you that right now, I would say that they're at max capacity. I'd say about a 15 mile an hour wind is that's where they're the most efficient. So they don't have to pitch the blades, that's just kind of naturally how they are. Now, as the wind speed picks up, those blades will get straighter and straighter, and then they'll start turning a little bit and pitching the wind, and these turbines actually will be shut down at 40 miles an hour. We had their wind farm manager come burn with us that year, and that really is what helped us, is that he got comfortable with fire and realized that there's absolutely no fire we can throw into these turbines that it's going to burn them. I mean, it's literally a solid steel base all the way up to the top. Those blades are fiberglass, but if we have a crown fire that'll touch that fiberglass, I mean, I'll be long dead, hopefully. Where water was a huge limiting factor for years up here, it's really begun to manipulate our grazing in our pastures, and so the cattle, they love their burnt grass, whether it be reduced insects, whether it be fresh, palatable green grass, whatever the case may be, you know, they love freshly burnt grass. And so what we've really noticed is, you know, they will go out to the far corner of the pasture to get every blade of burnt grass, and it can be anywhere from 1 mile to 1.5 miles from water. They're still going out there and getting it. Now that is not with a calf. If they've got a calf at their side, I can't say that I've noticed them, you know, doing that as often, but if they don't have a calf at their side, they will walk all the way to the far ends of the pasture and get every blade of fresh grass they can get. And we saw it last winter. There was a spot that we had burned a third of that pasture, and unfortunately we got no summer rain or late season rain, so we didn't get any winter grass. And it was kind of a joke because I mowed all of my fire breaks last fall, and it was basically dormant season fire breaks. I mean, I'd spent all that time mowing it, and I still had dead grass in where I mowed because no cool season grasses ever grew in last winter. But I will say that the cattle in that pasture, they grazed out every little piece of green grass that came up, especially that next spring as well.
So we started lighting, and Ken G was out here with us that day and had brought a friend, myself, Aaron, Seth, 2 full-time employees, another friend that is pretty knowledgeable about fire was out here. So we started lighting a backfire at 8:30, and we started up here on the northwest corner because we kind of had a southwest wind. We felt pretty good about the wind turbine road that we could contain it there, but we had a little mowed trail, kind of like Mike Porter will do at the Noble Foundation. He'll mow the fence lines out, 2 or 3 times prior to a burn to get it ready to burn. And so we had a 5-foot trail with a southwest wind that we were lighting a flank fire off of. So once we contained the north end here, we started moving down the flank, and when we got down to the southwest corner, then we came through and ripped the rest of it. And the thing that made us so successful with this fire, it's not common that I kill cedar trees the size of the trees you're looking at out here. I've got trees 15 to 20 feet tall that are dead. We had over probably a 75% kill of all the trees on this site. What made it so successful is the wind was shifting from southwest to west-southwest, Mike. And what happened when it shifted, you can see how this draw kind of runs southwest to northeast. It pushed the fire out along the draw at the base of it, and then it flanked up the sides. And before, we'd always burn this with the south wind, and it'd have to go uphill and downhill and uphill and downhill. But with that flank, it pushed it out, it flanked up the hills, so we got a longer duration of heat on these trees than we normally get. I'll get pretty extreme with fire and burn with wind conditions way out of prescription, 25, 30 mile an hour winds. But I only do that, Mike, if we've got a blacked out area. We've got a hole in the middle of this ranch, we call it the loop, and we'll burn out that loop. And then we've got pastures that will burn under very extreme conditions and blow the fire into that blacked out area and feel pretty safe about it. But too many times, too often, I think I move my fires too quickly. And I think there's more to be said for duration of heat than there is intensity of heat. And so we got a little bit slower fire here. It was kind of odd. I would drive the fire line, constantly, because we always have spots and jumps and things like that. When I would measure with my Kestrel the temperature and relative humidity on the west side, the upwind side, it would be 95 degrees and a relative humidity of maybe 30%. But when I would come over here to the downwind side, it would be 102 degrees with a relative humidity of 20%. So fires tend to manipulate and change things. And this fire, another reason I think we were so successful with it is that it was a smaller area. Mark, we burned areas, we burned as many as 6,000 acres in one day out here. But you're just lighting head fire. And not that we didn't backfire it or anything like that, but we're dealing with one head fire and it's moving out. This one was a smaller contained area, so when we got it contained with the backfire and the flank fire, when we lit the head fire and the opposite flank fire where we had a turbine road and we felt pretty safe, it kind of drew the fire together. Our wind speed wasn't real extreme. It was only about 8 to 10 miles per hour. And so we created an oven in here, and it sent up a plume of smoke that looked like an atomic bomb went off here. I had a friend call me from 40 miles away and say, "Chuck, are you guys burning?" And I was like, "Yeah, we are." He said, "Man, that must be some fire." And it was only 400 acres though, So that was kind of amazing to me. And so I'm still learning, I've been doing things like this for 30 years, but I tell people I don't have 30 years of experience, Mike. I've only got 1 year of experience 30 years in a row, because every year is a different year and I learn something new. And when it comes to ecology and landscapes and even cattle, you know, every year's different. This year my conception rates were terrible, and I don't know why. Body condition score on cows were good. They were climbing in nutrition, but my breed back was only 85%. And come to find out, that's happening all over this part of the country, and we don't know why. The vets can't tell us why. The nutritionists can't tell us why. Maybe it's because, Mark, we went from winter to summer without a spring. I don't know. I have no clue. But I know it was not good for us this year as far as conceptions, and we had plenty of forage. We're stocked at about 75% of capacity in an average year. This year is not average. This year I'm stocked at about 50% of capacity. I've got a lot of room, but that's a good thing for me, Harry, because we like to burn. And if you're gonna burn, you can't just decide, oh, I'm gonna burn next week. You need to think ahead. You need to know where you're gonna burn and kind of when you're gonna burn and what goals you want to accomplish. If you want to kill brush, you know, and you've got smaller trees, smaller cedar trees, a spring burn will work fine. But if you're trying to kill some of these bigger trees that are 10, 12, 15, 20 feet tall, you've got to be pretty extreme with it. And unfortunately, we have to push the limits and tend to like to burn. Well, honestly, the best burn would be during a burn ban. We typically don't do that. But if you want a crown fire and you really want to kill cedar, conditions need to be pretty extreme. And so understand a lot of what we do is outside of the normal prescription model of the rule of relative humidity between 40 and 60%, you know, temperature between 60 and 80 degrees, wind speed between 5 and 15. We get way outside that prescription. But we're fortunate and blessed in that we have a larger landscape to deal with, and so we can kind of manage that. Sometimes we have fires get out. I've got a good relationship with the fire department. I actually, Mark, donate to the fire department to not come out unless we call them. We're also fortunate that we're right along I-35. So everybody with the cell phone likes to stop, take a picture, post it on Facebook. I got the forestry department out here flying a plane one day on a prescribed fire because of all the chatter on social media. Got back to the governor's office. They dispatched they dispatched the forestry department, and they were like, "Where's this fire at?" And they were like, "In the Arbuckles." And they said, "Is it Chuck Coffey?" And they said, "Yes." And they said, "We're okay." Well, actually, we weren't okay. That fire kind of got out on us a little bit, but it burned on us. And so if the flames stay on us and don't get on a neighbor, we call those bonus acres, okay? And it's not to say we don't put in a lot of time and preparation, but I've been out here before where you create a fire NATO, and I've seen what looks like an F1 go up and travel for a quarter mile. And you know, what do you do about that? There's nothing you can do. The best fire guard in the world will not control something like that. Right after they built the wind farm, they mulched a lot of these roads. Had I known what that would do, I wouldn't have allowed the mulch, because that mulch, it was like a cedar mulch, would burn for days, and you'd get a 20, 30 mile an hour wind, and you'd get embers jump the road and stuff like that. So, you know, we're learning as we go. But nonetheless, we felt very good about this fire. I wished all our fires looked this good. Summer fires, the downside to them, this year there isn't a downside to it because we've had probably 15 inches of rain since this burn. But a lot of times if you burn in August and you have a dry fall, you go into the winter with no forage, okay? And so that's why if you're gonna summer burn, you better be stocked at below your average, you know, what your normal carrying capacity would be. You gotta plan for it. Spring burns, you can kind of get away with it, you know, because you're only 30 days away from forage. Back in the 1950s, 90% of these cedar trees weren't here. And today, you can see what we've got. The real grassy areas that don't have a lot of cedars, I don't worry a whole lot about burning them, but I do like to burn them every so often, because I know for a fact that every big cedar tree I kill, there's 10 little ones that I never even saw, because the seeds are here. So it's good. The other reason I like to burn areas that aren't cedar infested is just for an ecological response on the grass. These grasses evolved from fire. You know, we call it fire ecology. Fire was part of the ecology, Harry. Fire and grazing and overgrazing and undergrazing and diversity, and so we try to create that environment out here. Somebody asked earlier about, do we worry about fence line to fence line? No, I don't. You know, and sometimes my grazing management isn't the best, Mike. I might turn cows in here next year, and you'll drive out here and go, oh my God, this is overgrazed, and then right across the road within the same fence, it's undergrazed. But it creates diversity. And this, my hunters have learned to love this. This is a free food plot. I ought to double what I charge them when I do things like this. It depends again on our goals. If I do have a little brush in there, if I'm concerned about brush, I want to burn in the spring basically, well, not necessarily before the green gets there, but if my goal is brush control, I don't even worry about how much green's on the grass. I pick the day that's I think it's gonna kill the brush the best. If I'm looking for an ecological response and I don't want a lot of weed population, I want an inch or two of green on that grass. I want to be able to burn. I want to burn probably the last day possible and still be able to carry the fire.